Ferrari may have just discovered the one thing that changes the entire Lewis Hamilton story. A hidden problem in his car, a shocking data pattern after Austria, and a gap to Charles Leclerc that suddenly looked less like a driver issue and more like a Ferrari issue. Because when Hamilton said a costly issue stopped him from matching Leclerc, that was not just frustration. That was a warning. The source connects this story to Hamilton identifying a costly problem, Ferrari facing internal issue and strategy questions, and early race mistakes that already put pressure on the team. But it does not publish full telemetry, it does not confirm an official hidden defect report, and it does not reveal Ferrari's complete technical diagnosis. And that is exactly why this is so dangerous. Because in Formula One, the biggest problems are not always the ones that break the car. Sometimes the worst problems are the ones that let the car finish, but quietly steal lap time every single lap. A weak braking feel, a rear end Hamilton cannot trust, a balance shift that does not punish Leclerc the same way, a defect small enough to hide from the outside, but strong enough to destroy confidence inside the cockpit. So now the real question is not whether Hamilton was struggling. The real question is whether Ferrari finally found the reason he was struggling. Because if the data proves Hamilton was fighting a car that was never giving him the same platform, then the entire narrative flips. This was not Lewis Hamilton being exposed by Ferrari. This may have been Ferrari being exposed by Lewis Hamilton. Subscribe to the channel. To understand why this first block matters, you have to understand why Ferrari could not treat Hamilton's struggle like a normal adaptation problem. Because that would have been the easy answer. A new team, a new car, a new steering feel, a new engineering group, a new way of working, a new pressure inside the most emotional team in Formula One. When a driver moves to Ferrari, nothing is simple. Every lap is judged differently. Every radio message becomes bigger. Every gap to a teammate turns into a headline. And when that driver is Lewis Hamilton, the noise becomes even louder. So at first, the explanation almost writes itself. Hamilton is still adapting. Leclerc knows the car better. Ferrari is built around a different feeling. The transition takes time. That sounds reasonable, and part of it may be true. But the dangerous thing about reasonable explanations is that they can hide deeper problems. Because adaptation usually leaves a pattern. A driver learning a car loses time in certain predictable ways. Maybe he struggles more on corner entry. Maybe he does not fully trust the rear. Maybe he needs time to understand tire warm-up. Maybe he is still learning how the Ferrari responds when the fuel load changes and the race begins to stretch. Those things are normal. But when the data starts to show something that does not fit the simple explanation, the team has to stop. That is where this story becomes serious. Because Hamilton is not a driver who needs someone to explain what a Formula One car should feel like. He has spent his career reading tiny sensations through his hands, feet, back, and instinct. A small instability under braking. A front end that arrives half a heartbeat late. A rear axle that moves before he has finished asking the car to rotate. A throttle response that does not let him trust the exit. Those are not excuses. Those are signals. And when a driver with Hamilton's experience says there's a costly issue, Ferrari cannot just shrug and call it adaptation. They have to check. They have to compare. They have to ask whether the car is telling the driver something the outside world cannot see. That is why race data becomes so important. Data removes emotion. It does not care about reputation. It does not care about fan opinion. It does not care whether the driver is a 7-time world champion or a rookie fighting for a seat. It simply shows what happened, where the brake was applied, how quickly the throttle returned, how much steering correction was needed, how the tires behaved, where the car lost speed, where the driver hesitated, where the confidence disappeared. And if Ferrari's data after Austria shocked them, that means the numbers may have pointed to something deeper than a driver simply being uncomfortable. That is the key. Because from the outside, a gap to Charles Leclerc looks simple. One Ferrari is faster than the other. But inside the garage, that gap has to be dissected. Corner by corner, lap by lap, stint by stint, fuel load by fuel load, tire by tire. Ferrari has to ask whether Hamilton is losing time because Leclerc is extracting more or because Hamilton's car is forcing him to leave time behind. That difference changes everything. If Leclerc is simply faster through a section, Ferrari can study technique. If Hamilton is braking earlier because he lacks trust, Ferrari has to ask why the trust is missing. If Hamilton is waiting longer on throttle, Ferrari has to ask whether the rear is refusing to stay planted. If Hamilton's tires are overheating faster, Ferrari has to ask whether the balance is making him slide more than he should. If his steering trace shows corrections that Leclerc does not need, Ferrari has to ask whether the car is truly behaving the same. That is where a hidden defect becomes so dangerous. It does not need to destroy the car. It only needs to disturb the driver. A hidden defect can be small enough that the car still finishes the race. It can be subtle enough that cameras do not catch it. It can be quiet enough that fans only see the result, not the cause. But inside the cockpit, it can feel enormous. Because a Formula One car at the limit is not driven with comfort. It is driven with trust. The driver commits before the car has fully proven it will hold. He brakes at a point where hesitation costs time. He turns in with the belief that the front will respond. He goes back to throttle, trusting the rear will not punish him. If that trust is damaged, even slightly, the lap starts bleeding time everywhere. Not in one dramatic moment. In tiny cuts, a little earlier on the brake, a little less minimum speed, a little more correction, a little later on the throttle, a little more tire temperature, a little less confidence next lap. That is how a hidden issue becomes a visible gap. And that is why Hamilton's comparison with Leclerc is so sensitive. Leclerc is the established Ferrari reference. He knows the team's language. He knows how the car usually feels. He knows the garage. He knows which imperfections are normal Ferrari behavior and which ones are warning signs. Hamilton is still building that internal map. So if Hamilton feels something strange, the team has to separate two possibilities. Is he feeling a normal Ferrari trait he has not yet mastered? Or is he feeling a real problem the team has not fully identified? That is not easy, because both can look similar at first. A driver adjusting to a new car may sound uncertain. A driver fighting a defect may also sound uncertain. A driver learning new systems may lose time. A driver managing an unstable car may lose time too. The difference is in the data, and that is why Austria matters in this narrative. Austria exposes confidence. It exposes braking stability. It exposes traction. It exposes how quickly a driver can rotate the car and get back to power. It exposes whether the car gives the driver a clean, predictable platform or whether it asks for constant management. A car that feels slightly wrong can punish a driver there over and over again. Not always in a spectacular way. In the way that makes a driver look like he is missing something. That is the cruel part. A hidden defect can make the driver look like the problem. It can make the driver appear cautious. It can make the driver appear slower to adapt. It can make the teammate comparison look harsher than it really is. And that is why Ferrari had to be careful. Because if the team misreads the data, it risks blaming the wrong side of the garage. If it assumes Hamilton is the problem, it may chase driver adaptation while a technical issue continues stealing lap time. If it assumes the car is the problem too quickly, it may ignore areas where Hamilton still genuinely needs to adapt. The truth may be a combination. That is what makes this so difficult. Formula One problems are rarely clean. Hamilton may have been learning the Ferrari. Leclerc may have been extracting more from the package. Ferrari may have had strategy questions. There may have been a car issue. All of those things can exist at the same time. But the hidden defect theory matters because it changes the direction of the investigation. Instead of asking only how Hamilton can adapt to Ferrari, the team must ask how Ferrari can give Hamilton a car worth trusting. That is a very different question, and it puts pressure on Ferrari. Because bringing Hamilton into the team was never just about putting a famous name in red. It was about building a championship force. It was about combining experience, race intelligence, star power, and technical feedback with Ferrari's ambition. But none of that works if the car does not give him a stable platform. A driver can adapt to a new team. He can adapt to procedures. He can adapt to a different steering wheel, a different race engineer, a different strategic language. But he cannot fully adapt to a car that is hiding a problem. He can only compensate, and compensation costs time. That is the word that matters. Compensation. A driver compensates when the car is not giving him what he needs. He brakes earlier to protect the rear. He opens the steering more carefully. He delays throttle. He chooses a safer line. He manages the tires because the balance is already hurting them. From the outside, compensation looks like lack of pace. Inside the cockpit, it feels like survival. That may be what Ferrari needed to understand. Was Hamilton racing, or was Hamilton compensating? Because those are not the same thing. Racing is attack. Compensating is damage control. And a driver of Hamilton's level does not build a career on damage control unless the car forces him there. That is why the data comparison with Leclerc becomes the central evidence. If Leclerc can attack a braking zone and Hamilton cannot, Ferrari must ask why. If Leclerc can rotate the car earlier and Hamilton has to wait, Ferrari must ask why. If Leclerc can apply throttle cleanly and Hamilton has to nurse the rear, Ferrari must ask why. And if those differences appear repeatedly in the same types of corners across the same phases of the stint, then Ferrari has to go deeper. Not just setup deeper, car deeper, part deeper, correlation deeper, because a hidden defect may not announce itself as a broken component. It may appear as a mismatch. The setup says one thing, but the car does another. The simulator says the balance should be manageable, but the track says no. The expected tire behavior does not match the real degradation. The driver reports instability, but the obvious numbers do not immediately explain it. That is when the investigation becomes serious. Ferrari would have to look at whether the problem came from a part, a sensor, a calibration, a mechanical inconsistency, a setup direction, or the way the car responds to Hamilton's driving demands. The source does not reveal that full diagnosis, so the exact technical cause cannot be stated as fact. But the logic of the story is clear. Ferrari had a reason to look beyond the surface. And once a team looks beyond the surface, everything changes. Because the first layer of the story was Hamilton versus Leclerc. The second layer is Hamilton versus the car. And the third layer is Ferrari versus its own understanding. That third layer is the most important. Because if Ferrari did not immediately understand what Hamilton was fighting, that becomes a team issue. Not a scandal, not a disaster, but a warning. A warning that the car, the data, the feedback, and the engineering response were not perfectly aligned. And in Formula One, misalignment is expensive. A driver says the rear feels weak. The data says it looks acceptable. The setup change helps one corner, but hurts another. The tire temperatures suggest one thing. The lap time suggests something else. The teammate comparison complicates everything.